it's great to see y'all. Please feel free to jump in wherever you want and direct this where you want it to go, because I want you to get the questions you want answered. So I'll just start by asking, does anybody have anything they want to jump in on? Or do you want me to just start? Okay, I'm going to just start. One of the big things people ask a lot about is victim contact, survivor contact, that's a controversial issue for people. I've been doing it for 43 years, and I have had nothing but really good reactions, except in one case where the woman felt coerced to be there by the man, and I told her to leave, and I stayed with him. And she had a voice. But what I've gotten, and the way I do it, is we tell men who are calling our program that it is our policy to talk with their partners if there's no protective order. And if there's no, if the partner is willing to talk with us. We also give our phone number so that the partner can contact us and is able to, if they have any questions. And the way we set up intake is for an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we bring a lot of the people we work with are still living together. In fact, most of them are. And so, and they may not stay that way, but oftentimes they start that way. So we say, if your partner feels comfortable coming in, we're going to talk to each of you separately. Then we're going to bring you in together to talk about timeout. And we do timeout in a very holistic way, and I'll get into that. But so if the partner does not feel comfortable coming in person, we do a phone intake with them. Otherwise, we have them, and most of them feel very good about coming in together. And I have several goals with that. You would be surprised at how many female partners are unaware of shelter services other than that they could stay at a shelter, that they don't know that they can get personal empowerment groups, support groups, that they can find out about restraining orders. So I use this time to give the partner resources, but I primarily want to get a big picture about what's going on. So I ask each person the same questions. I ask questions about family of origin, because that's a real important question. And I ask them if they like their mother, if they like their father. And I ask the survivor, does your partner like his mother, his father? And they'll say, well, oh, they love them. I say, no, I didn't ask if they love, do they like and respect? I want to get any sense about what's going on intergenerationally. I ask them what happened to bring them there. And oftentimes I'll get two different stories there. I ask about targets of abuse, like who, I want to know if somebody's more generally violent. Like, we have men in group who have never done anything to anybody outside of the family. And we have men with rap sheets a mile long, or men who have been in gangs, men who have murdered, all the way to men who are more generally family specific in their aggression and more likely nuclear family specific. So we have that range in group. Right now, we have a group where only one man in that program, and that's by listening to the partner and getting the partner's feedback. He actually strangled her. And he has been the most violent man in our group, our current group. So I asked them a lot of the same questions. I asked, have you ever done anything to your partner where they had to get medical care? And I'll just give you some examples that really happened. The man I asked about that had to think about it, which gives you an answer right there. When I talked to his wife, she pulled back her hair and she had a scar across her earlobe where he used a knife and almost attached her earlobe. She had a scar down the side of her face. She believed that his violence was caused by his drinking, stayed away from him for a year and came back and then experienced the violence that had never gone away because it wasn't caused by the drinking. So I get information I would never get otherwise. I've gotten information about a man who's, or several men really, whose fathers had killed their mothers, which I didn't get from him. I got from the partner. I remember one of the men in group who was incredibly flat, his affect was so flat. He showed very little emotion. When I interviewed him, I asked him about anything unusual in the family, who he grew up with, whatever. And he said, you know, I had a mom and dad, and, you know, I wasn't close. I'm not close to either one of them now. My mom died. When she came in, she said, did he tell you what happened to him when he was 6? I said, why don't you tell me? I can't tell you what he told me, but you can tell me whatever you want. And she said, well, when he was 6 years old, he was watching TV with his father and his brother. And his mother came into the room, looked at them, went into the other room, and they heard 2 gunshots ring out. Nobody got up from the TV set. They sat and watched the program till the very end. And then they went in and his mother was dead. She had killed herself. So it gives you information about why he's difficult to reach and how we might be able to get to him. So that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to do an assessment of dangerousness. We're trying to build hope that people can change, because I don't know how many of you get people who say, well, do you ever see anybody change? Can we stop this? I want to get rid of my anger. We tell people we're not going to get rid of your anger, but we can work on how you express your anger. We can work on the differences in, you know, being aggressive, being violent, and just being angry, so that anger becomes a healthy thing. And so we're getting questions about drugs and alcohol. One of the men I asked, I said, are drugs or alcohol a problem in your family? No, I don't have a problem with drugs or alcohol. When she came in, I said, are drugs or alcohol a problem in your family? Oh yeah, they are. I said, which or both? She said, alcohol. And I said, why don't you tell me why that's a problem? She said, well, he always says he has 2 drinks a night, but they're like vats. They're like 16 ounces, you know? And so they're not a problem for him, they're a problem for her. So what you get is a context to do your work. What you get is a context with weapons, with targets of abuse, with how somebody might parent. One of the men in our group who was a 3rd striker, he has very violent crimes outside of the family, who was a man who put his wife in a coma and was never arrested for that because that was never brought out. But he had his children taken from him because he left bruises on their bottoms. And he came in and he said, can I show you pictures of my kids? And I said, sure. And I thought he'd show me a couple pictures. He had 3 boys. I literally sat with him for over an hour looking at 200 pictures in his phone as he told me about his children and the nuances of each of those children. So despite the fact that he was abusive to the mother, that he was very violent, he cared about his kids. So sometimes you have a way into somebody, right, that you wouldn't have otherwise. These are all important things that we get in the intake. Plus the fact that when we talk to the partner may say something like, you know, he's not going to let me go into counseling by myself. He has to be there with me. He won't let me go in. I say, I think I can help you out with that. And when he comes in, I say, you know, while you're in our program, I think it's important for your partner to get support and help. And so I've referred your partner to different programs, and I've asked him or her, because we have gay men in our group, I've asked them to call me back and let me know how it's going. So you sort of take the onus off the partner. The other thing that happens because you do that is the partner now has the ability to call you during the course of the program because they have a contact. And they have the ability to call and say, you know, things are going well in this area, but could you work on this? And we have not had, in general, survivors abuse that at all. A couple times during the last 43 years, we've had survivors who kind of just call with anything, but that's not true most of the time. They call with really specific concerns. And we then have a way to bring that topic up. And I'll give you an example of that. One of the young women who called us said, you know, he's better in every way. He's not hitting me or anything, but he's so jealous. Can you do something about that? I mean, he interrogates me when he comes home. And one of the things I asked the partner right away is, can I tell this man in group, can I tell him that you called? Now, I believe it or not, I have partners who say, oh yeah, I already told him I was going to call you, which gives you some sense of how safe they might feel. This young woman said, no, I really don't want you to tell him. I don't want you to tell him that I called. I said, that's fine. I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll bring up in group tonight non-physical ways of controlling your partner and ways to intimidate without ever laying a hand on anybody. And that's what we did in group that night. And I'm going to walk you through this because it's also the process we use. And, you know, Chris was talking about they give one homework. We don't give homework unless it's specific to a person, generally speaking. So, so this young man, we brought up jealousy as a way, a non-physical way of controlling a partner. And he wound up, you know, copying to everything she said. He said, you know, I don't know why I do this. He said, I don't trust her. And, you know, she goes out with her friends and she comes home and I just grill her. I don't know why I do that. And I don't want to do it, but I just do it. And I said to him, so why do you think you're special to her? And he said, I don't know. And I said, we have to have a clue, because when you feel insecure, you have to have some sense of why somebody wants to be with you. So I thought, here's an opportunity for men in group to do something they're not used to doing, which is give emotional gifts to each other. So I said to the men in group, let's everybody take turns telling him why he's special. So the first guy was really, you know, he was embarrassed. They all looked kind of embarrassed. And the first guy said, well, you're kind of cute. And it made everybody laugh. And they all laughed. And then they were able to go around. And one of the men said, you know, you listen to me. You listen. And it feels really good. And another guy said, you're smart. You get things that, you know, are hard for people to get. And somebody else said, you have a good sense of humor. And they went around the room and everybody gave him a gift. And by the time he got to him, he's like kind of puffed up like this, feeling pretty good. And I said, I'm going to give you a little homework assignment this week. I want you to pick 2 or 3 things that these men have said to you. And I want you to be that guy this week. And then I want you to come back next week and tell us how you were that guy. And that's what he did. And so we try to direct homework specifically to people based on what's going on in their lives. And the men in group, when I try to give them general homework, laugh at me. So, you know, because they feel like they have a voice, and I want them to feel like that. So in the intake, we're getting all of the information we can. We want to find out about whether they have kids. We want to find out about, you know, how deep domestic violence may go. Do they have grandparents? Do they have aunts and uncles that are abusive? what are we looking at here? What kind of support do they have? We also want to find out about religion, because a number of the men in group have used religion as kind of a cudgel to control their partners if they're very fundamentally religious. So we want to get that information as well. So we use the intake to get as much information about the person who's coming into our group as we can, and also to give that person hope, and also to build a connection. I have a small program, so one of the two facilitators is the person who does the intake. I think that's important. And I know there are programs that are bigger and they have an intake person, but they make contact and they make connection with that person who does the intake. And I think that's a really good place to start, because they feel when they start the group, they have an ally in a sense. So we're doing that. After I do the separate with each of the people that I've done, once I've spoken to the partner and the participant in our group, I bring them together and I go over timeout. And I do timeout, and if you want to use modern terminology, we include somatic experiencing and mindfulness and preventative thinking and timeout. We do a very extensive kind of timeout. One of the things I talk to people about are their styles of anger. So let me just ask you to think about this. Most of us get together in relationship with people who do anger differently than we do. They do conflict differently. So I want you to think about how many of you would consider yourselves more volatile when you get angry. And I mean, maybe your eyeballs pop out of your head a little bit. Maybe the veins stand out in your neck. Maybe you move your arms around. Maybe your voice gets a little louder. Maybe you drool a little bit out of the corner of your mouth. But think about how you do anger. And some people are calmer with their anger. They're more passive with it, because what tends to happen is the meaning we place on things is the meaning that it for us. In other words, we're judging people on the wrong yardstick. We're using our yardstick, right? What would it mean to me? So we want to look at meaning. What does it mean to you when your partner steps back? And for a lot of people who are more volatile, it means that they don't care. And for people who are more passive, it also means they don't care, but they're also afraid, and it's intimidating. So the meaning is different. And when we're doing work in group, we want to get to meaning. So oftentimes we're unraveling incidents in group to get to the meaning. But when I bring them in to do timeout, I talk to them, I show them, I give them handouts, by the way. I give them 5 or 6 handouts. I call them their souvenir prizes when they come into group. And I give for both people a set of handouts. And there's 5 or 6 pages. And they're different things, but one of them is a timeout sheet. And so we look at the anger paradigm, which is basically an event happens, right? There's an incident. There is a perception of that incident. Like, what's my meaning? What does this mean to me? What's my judgment about this? And physiological arousal at the same time, and then reaction. And so we want to come between the meaning and the reaction. And the easiest place to do that is with arousal. It can take days to figure out what somebody's perception is. It can take years for some people to figure out how they see things and why things affect them. So we're looking at physiological arousal. So I start talking to them about what is it you feel in your body? What happens in your body when you start getting upset? And some people don't know. And you can say things like, well, for some people, it feels like their heart's racing. For some people, their tummy gets clutches, or there's tummy turns. For some people, they get tight in the shoulders, their jaws clench. So you go through, and some of them are able to say, well, you know, my stomach gets in a knot, or I get hot, my head gets hot. And I said, that's your cue. That's your fuse. That's the identification of your fuse. And I will often say to people, do you ever feel like telling a boss or a customer or a client to shove it? And almost everybody, and I probably in this room, everybody would say, yeah, I feel like telling a client or a boss, supervisor, or a coworker to shove it. How often do you do that? Well, most often people don't. If you've got somebody in your group who acts out at work, you've got a whole different problem because most of them don't, because there are logical consequences and witnesses. So I said, you already have a built-in timeout. You already have a way that you have used successfully at work to step back from your strong feelings. So that's what we're going to work on. When you give people a choice, and by the way, we've had a couple grad students do questionnaires in our group, and overwhelmingly the men said that timeout was the tool that they grabbed onto because it made them feel like they could do something else instead of being violent. Now, most of them don't do it well at first. So we do the thing. So we show them the paradigm. We ask them where they feel it in their body. And we say, when you start to feel that tummy starting to knot, we're going to ask you to do a few things. We're going to ask you to leave. If you're in the same room and you can stay in the same house or apartment and not play chase with each other, that's okay. Otherwise, we want you to leave the house. And while you're gone, we want you to do a couple things. One is we want you to do a physiological cool down, because when you're upset, when you're angry, you're triggered into fight versus flight versus freeze. You're triggered. And it's a very primitive mechanism in your brain. And we want you to get out of that primitive mechanism. So you need to physiologically chill. We need to get your physiological energy down. But then the second thing is up here. This is where we're getting into what people think and what they say to themselves. What's your talk up here? And do you leave a situation and come back as angry as you were when you left? What did you do when you were gone? Well, I thought about it. And so, well, we encourage people not to think, but we encourage you to think differently, because most people think like history majors when they're mad, right? They remember everything that's happened, the history of that relationship. And now they feel completely, locked and loaded and ready to take off on the other person. So we get them to start practicing self-soothing talk, talking, positive self-talk. For people who've been arrested, they may say, I don't want to get arrested again. I don't want to lose my family. But what we want them to get to is, what do you want to have happen? I want to want to feel good about how I handled this. I want my wife or my partner to feel safe. I want my kids to respect me, whatever that is, to begin to talk themselves down. Once they physiologically calm down and talk themselves down, now you go back to perception. And by the way, while they're gone, you can do a number of things. They can do refocusing, like notice 5 things you can see, 5 things you can smell. Use your senses. We give people in group lists so they can call somebody else in group or email somebody else in group. We work on who are your support systems so that you have places to plug in when you're getting upset. And so we're talking about prevention. So when you leave, now we have you think about, go back to your perception. How did you interpret that? What did it mean to you? What is an alternative way of looking at it that's just as valid? For instance, I remember one of the men in our group saying, well, my wife lied to me. Now, why would you lie to me if you're afraid of me? I said, I'd lie to you all the time if I was afraid of you, because I'd be afraid of your reaction, which you've had when I tell you the truth. So, let's look at it a different way. What's a different way of looking at it? Do you believe your partner is out to get you? Is there another way of looking at it? Do you believe, are you always afraid your partner's going to leave? Are you giving yourself evidence every time you take off on your partner that she has reason to leave or he has reason to leave? Let's look at what you can do. I mean, we're pretty practical with things. So we get to the perception. Now, the other part is empowerment. And it's about going back to your partner and trying to solve the problem. And that could be asking for what you want. We work on ways to ask for what you want, ways to do positive confrontation, different things like that. So we're working on a lot of skills at the same time, but we're also working on empathy. How do you think your partner felt when that was happening? If you were your partner, how do you feel? Now in LA County, California is has every county is monitored by the probation department, and different probation departments have different rules, even though the law is the same for everyone. In LA County, we do not have to use any curriculum. A lot of new people want to use a curriculum to start with. What we created in LA County, our BIP organization created what's called the Toolbox. And the Toolbox is a group of handouts developed by facilitators in group. And they're divided into what are called core topics. So it's an alternative to curriculum. And so, for instance, we have a section on empathy, and we have empathy exercises there. We have a section on power and control. We have a section on anger. We have a section on healthy families. We have a section on effects on victims, what children learn, all that kind of thing. We have a section on forms. We have a section on assessment of dangerousness. And what we did was to have all of the facilitators that we worked with create handouts, and they're in those sections. So you can use those handouts in your group as a group topic if you want. And as long as you give the author credit, you can run off as many as you want. And yes, thanks, David. The Toolbox can be found if you go to abips.com. It's in your chat, www.ab like brother, IP like program, S like sister.com. Live transcription to be enabled for the meeting. Okay, I put enabled in. Also, if you're interested, if you go to my website, LaViolette.com, you can get all my contact information, and you can there's a bunch of handouts and articles and different things on that website. You can download anything you want on that. So, so we're doing that on the intake, and we're explaining timeout so that there's a way to build in accountability, so that the participant understands that the person they live with understands what it's supposed to look like. And we tell them to be gone, hopefully no longer than an hour, because if they're gone longer, they're ruminating. But if it takes them longer than an hour, that they should call their partner and say, I'm working this out, I'll be back. Because for a lot of the people in group, they're going to leave and they're going to say, okay, bitch, I'm gone. Or I'm going to go drink, or I'm hooking up with somebody else. You're not using this time to threaten someone. You're using this time to build trust. You're using this time to build trust that you'll come back. You're using this time to build trust that you will be nonviolent. You're using this time to build trust that you will try to solve a problem and not just sweep everything under the carpet. Now, learning a timeout like that takes a long time. For anybody who does group. But we work on that throughout group. During group sessions, we unravel incidents. So men will come in with a situation. We'll go through. For instance, the man I was telling you about who beat up his wife, believed that it was not harmful to his children, because even though it happened in front of his children, he wasn't hitting them. So I said to 3 men in group who I knew had observed their fathers beating their mother, I said, can you tell him how it affected you when your dad beat up your mom? And they were able to get through to him. And I know you know this, people in your groups can have so much impact on the other men in group. And so having men in group that we've had for over 10 years, over 3 years with these new guys makes a huge difference in how they are responding. And like Chris said, you know, if you're dealing with somebody who has a trauma background, you're dealing with, a year is not enough. A year is basically a starting time. Does anybody have any questions right now? Anybody have anything they want to jump in on? Because I'm just blabbing away and I'm happy to have. Anybody? Yes, Karen.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have a question about how do you, so my understanding is you bring both the victim and the perpetrator in during that intake and give them both handouts. How do you explain the timeout to the victim? How is it, do you do it any different?
No, I actually explain the timeout when they're both together.
Okay.
So I explain it the same way. And I also say to the victim and in front of the perpetrator, if your partner's not taking the timeout, the person who's doing the raging, doing the aggression needs to take responsibility. But if they're not, your partner has the right to take a timeout. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm only asking because I know that sometimes then they put the onus on her to tell them like that you need, you know, you need to calm down, and we all know how that works out really well. So I was just curious how you presented it in that form and fashion, because we don't do that with the victims. We do that solely with the perpetrators. But because, you know, we're really putting the accountability back on them. Like it's your responsibility to take a timeout when you need to take a timeout, right? And sometimes I feel it, or my concern would be by sharing that with the victim, that they kind of feel like, well, she needs to tell me when she thinks I need to take a timeout.
And we're real clear, Karen, you've got to be the one that takes the time out. It's your responsibility to take the time out. It is not your partner's. Beautiful. But if you're not taking it, your partner has a right to be safe.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I was going to tell you guys a story because it really speaks to the whole trauma deal. And I thought it would be interesting to you. I want to tell you about one of the men in our group who actually was in our group for 20 years. And he died during COVID, or he'd still be in group. And he was a wonderful guy, but he was in the mafia. And so I felt like I was like in The Sopranos, but so I'm from New Jersey. We got to be proud of something in Jersey. We got the mafia, the real mafia, and right, Antonia from New Jersey, loving it. But we got the Jersey Shore too. And the Jersey Shore, especially south, is really beautiful and wonderful, right? Cape May and Wildwood and everything. Yeah. I grew up in Jersey. So this guy was from Jersey. We connected on that because I have an edge of being a thug. So it works out really well for me in group. Anyway, he came into group not because he beat up women. He didn't think that was a big whoop-de-doo. He came into group because during a business deal, he took out a gun and put the gun in the guy's mouth, and the gun had a hair trigger. And so for some reason, he pulled it out of the guy's mouth. He wound up shooting himself in the foot. And when he shot himself in the foot, he was so enraged that he didn't notice that he shot himself. And he met a friend who said, "Hey man, you got blood coming out of your shoe." He said, "Oh God, I must have shot myself." And the guy said to him, "You know, I think you might have an anger management problem," which I thought was a cute little euphemism, you know, for violence. So he was referred to Kaiser, which is a giant HMO in California. And Kaiser referred him to us. When he came in, we found out a lot about him. that was really important. First, he was born in prison because his mother was part of organized crime. And he was born in prison and taken away from his mother at birth. He was placed with family who really couldn't handle him, who gave him to a woman out in a rural area. He was unhappy as a child. She then, because he never kind of connected with her, she placed him in an orphanage where he was routinely beaten by priests. One priest in particular, he said to that priest, "When I get big, I'm going to come back and I'm going to kill you." And he said, "I did go back to kill that priest." He said he was lucky he was already dead. And so he ran away from the orphanage with another little boy when they were about 11 years old. And they lived on the street. They became part of organized crime. He spent a lot of his growing up time in Rikers, in Trenton State. He moved to California. He spent time in prison in California. But he was one of those guys that had really great leadership skills, which you wind up seeing with the leadership in gangs, right? Smart, charismatic oftentimes, have the ability to bring people in. He was like that. So he became a multimillionaire businessman. He had his own company. Some people say, did he run an olive oil company? Like in The Godfather. I do a really good Godfather imitation. "They shot my San Santino 150 times. We're taken to the mattresses, the Tattaglia family." Okay, so anyway, so he wound up being in group, and he was in group probably about 4 or 5 months. And he came in one night and he said, "This guy owes me $1,500. He has not paid me. I'm going to blow his effing kneecaps off." And I said, "Well, you can't do that." And he said, "I'm not doing it. I'm hiring somebody." So we have low standards for success in our program, as long as they're not doing it themselves, you know. So we're sitting there thinking, okay, what are we going to do with this guy? Maybe some of you are wondering about duty to warn. Are any of you thinking about that? In this case, we have a viable threat, but we don't know the intended victim. Generally speaking, in domestic violence cases, you know the intended victim, so you have a duty to warn. We have no duty to warn, and in fact can't, because we don't know who to say. We don't know anything. So we have to create a safety planning group. One of the things we know about this guy is if he gives his word, he keeps it. We spent the entire group, and probation, by the way, wants everybody to talk every week in group. If you have somebody who's potentially lethal, you better spend time with them. And everybody in group learns something. There's a big empathy lesson here. What does it feel like to be in a room with somebody whose rage and anger fills up the room, and they didn't start it and they have no control over it? So that's one of the things that's happening in the room. One of the other things is if they want to say something to this guy, they better think carefully about what they say and the timing of what they say, which are really good skills for them, right? Really good skills in their own relationships. The other thing they learn is perspective. Sometimes somebody else's issues are bigger than theirs. So we work with him in group and we create a safety plan. And the safety plan is you will call, you give your word to do nothing physically violent to this guy between this week and our next group meeting. The second thing is if you start to escalate, you will call either Bill or myself, my co-facilitator, and you will call one of us. He gives his word on that. Then we have 3 guys in group who volunteer to call him during the course of the week to check in on him. So he comes back the next week and he says, and we haven't heard from him, and he says, "Hey, I took care of it." We said, "What'd you do?" He said, "I just called the guy. I said, hey man, I'm in one of those violence groups. It's about all I can do to hang on to myself." He said the guy was over in 15 minutes, paid him everything he owed him. I said, nice use of group. Anyway, we worked with this guy. We spent a lot of time with him because he said things like, and the reason I'm using him is because at a very rudimentary level, he said, I don't even know what you mean when you talk about love. He said, what is love? He said, you guys had parents. They might have beat each other up. They might have, your dad might have beat you up. You might have had, but I bet they told you they loved you sometimes. I bet they took you on vacation. I bet sometimes they read you a story. He said, I never had any of that. And he was unique in that way. He's very unique. He's the only person in 43 years I've met that was born in prison. So we had to work with him on that. I said to him, do you know anybody who loves anybody? He said, yeah, I got a couple friends. I think they love their wives. I said, watch them. Watch what they do. Practice what they do. We're rewiring, as Steve Haley was talking about, we're rewiring a brain, right? For all these neural pathways that never got stimulated. We're having to teach somebody about empathy. We're having to teach somebody about what love looks like. And we did everything with him. And what I like about not having a mandated curriculum is as long as we cover the core issues, we can be as creative as we want. So we did with him role playing. We did Virginia Satir's family sculpting. We did empathy exercises. I'll tell you about an exercise if I have time that we do that's really good. Okay, I'm looking at the time, I've got time. So we worked with him. He stayed in group. He'd been in group probably about 5 years. And he came in one night and he said, I gotta tell you guys something I feel really good about. So we ask people to come in with their success stories. We want to hear about what they do that works. And we want them to feel good about themselves. The better they feel about themselves, the more able they are to look at their glitches, right? Their violence. It's the reason why when research is done on the intake, you don't hear much. And if researchers don't talk to people who are doing the work, they can say that people get more violent when they're in group. It's because they talk about more violence because they're more able to talk about it and they lied about it in the intake, right? So you get some research that has said groups make people more violent. I think it in general, makes them more honest about their violence. So he came in and he said, my girlfriend had a stroke. He said, I'm bathing her and I'm feeding her and I'm caring for her. And I never knew I could be that kind of a man. And, isn't that what we all want with our clients, to be able to look in the mirror and like who they see and feel that they have integrity in their actions? And he became a man that treated women with such respect, where his girlfriend would say to him, do you really have to talk like that? And he'd go, no, I guess I don't. And he became a role model for men in group. He became a man who had to look at the impact he had on his children. He was upset because his children were angry at him for abandoning them. He said, I didn't abandon them, I was in prison. We said, that's kind of abandoning them. We had to work on this whole area of empathy, and we worked on expectations. What do you expect from women? Because one of the things I've seen in group, and I don't know if you've seen it, is that there are much higher expectations for their mothers than for their fathers. If they had, and their anger is more likely, if there's a male-female team, their anger is more likely to be directed at a woman who does confrontation with them because she becomes the bad mother. And I've actually had men say that to me, Alyce, when you get upset, it's like you're the bad mother. So it's an interesting, you're playing off a gender dynamic that becomes important. And what I find is that it's important for my male co-facilitator. Oftentimes the men give the male co-facilitator in group credit for what I've said. I've got to say that really pisses me off. But I have good guys I work with and they say, oh, I didn't say that, Alyce did. We don't shove it down anybody's throat. We just mention it. Oh, thanks, Alyce. So there's this, respectful interplay with the team that I think is important. So intake wise, I've covered that. This guy, by the way, as I said, he was in group for 20 years. He was lovely. And we build a family in group. When I say healthy family, that's how I look at group. It's community. It's a place for people not to feel where they feel they can get support, but they also feel where they can be confronted by somebody who cares about them. And so when I say healthy family, I treat it like a healthy family. I treat it like a family. I will tell you that oh, Antonia, you work at Jersey City. That's cool. So I lived in Camden. So let me tell you that this man, the group would have gone to his funeral. They would have gone as a group to his funeral. And he died during COVID. And his funeral was the very week that they said there can be gatherings of no more than 10 people in California. And none of us got to say goodbye. And we had to work through that in group because he was such a pillar in this program. He was somebody that everybody loved and cared about in the Long Beach group. So let me ask you, anybody have questions to this point? Anybody else? Okay, would you like me to go on and tell about some of the things we do in group, some of the activities we do? One of the things that has been the most powerful activity, and it's in the toolbox, by the way, but I adapted it from Susan Schechter's work. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Susan Schechter, but she was a pioneer in the battered women's movement, and she developed a booklet for women in the shelter and for advocates in the shelter. And she had an exercise that I thought was so important. And let me give it to you. I'll tell you what it is, and I'll tell you how we use it. I would ask people, think about a time in your life. And when I do it with victims, I do any time in their life. When I do it with perpetrators, I ask them to think about a time in their life prior to the age of 11 or 12, where they felt powerless or afraid. Think about a time in your life prior to the age of 11 or 12 where you felt powerless or afraid. And then there's a series of questions, which I will give you. The first one is, what happened? What was the situation? The second one is, who did you tell about what happened? And who did you avoid telling? Who did you tell and who did you avoid telling? The next question is, who did you blame for what happened? Who did you blame? The next question is, how was the situation resolved, or was it resolved? And the last question is, how do you feel when you talk about it now? How do you feel when you talk about it now? So what happened with this situation is then I break the men into smaller groups, because even in a group of 10 or 12 men, you have people that dominate and people that don't talk. I want to break them into groups so everybody has a chance. So I might break them, if there are 12 men in group, into 3 groups. I might break them into 2s, but I put them together to talk about these issues. And then after they've had time to really go through this, we bring them back together. And when we bring them back, we go through everything. So let me tell you why I do this. First part is, who did you tell and who did you avoid telling? What makes somebody safe? I have so many men in my group who say, they don't pay attention to who they're dealing with. They get involved in relationships. They don't pay attention to what this person is like. What is the depth of relationship you have with this person? I think a lot of the folks in perpetrators groups expect more than they give in relationship. So I want them to say, who did you trust? What makes somebody trustworthy? Why did you trust this person? What makes somebody you feel you can talk to? And then who did you avoid telling? Why didn't you tell these people? What makes somebody untrustworthy? What happens there? So to look at that and then to create a safety list. Who can you call? Who can you talk to? What's the level of relationship with them? If you were in a really tough place and you had to leave, who would you call? And what would make you call that person? So we're creating a safety list. The second question about, or the next question about who did you blame? We find that people who have been victimized tend to blame themselves. So we can talk about self-blame. We can talk about behavioral self-blame. We can talk about characterological self-blame, but we can also talk about shame and the difference between shame and guilt. And how every time you cross your lines, your own bottom lines, you create more shame. And that the only way to change that is to stop crossing your bottom line, stop doing the things that you're ashamed of. We get into the big thing with this exercise is empathy. So we get people to talk about their trauma. I'll give you an example. One of the men was 10 years old and he talked about his mother left for the market. Him and his brother were acting out, bugging their father, and their father got really angry at them. Their father was abusive. He chased them with a knife. He chased them upstairs. This young man, this guy who was in his 40s, he was 10 at the time, went under the bed, pushed his brother under the bed. The father's screaming at him. They're terrified. Mom comes home. Dad takes the knife, puts it behind his shirt. Mom never knows about it because they don't tell her. And he's telling this story now and he's crying. So what we're able to talk about is the long-term effects of being afraid, because they want to be forgiven pretty quickly by their partners, right? They're saying, I haven't called her a bitch in 5 weeks. I mean, what, I don't get it. Or I haven't hit her in a month or 3 months. Why doesn't she move on? We are able to talk about the long-term effects of trauma, that even though she wants to get over it, she can't get over it until you have demonstrated over and over again that she's safe or he's safe. And you can get the support you need from group. We can see that change in the way you deal with things here. But your partner's not going to be able to see that for a while. So we talk about that. The other thing we can then talk about is once they've been able to sit with their own victimization, we can then say, what do you think it feels like for your partner or your children when you treat them that way? What do you think it's like for them? So we're building a bridge to empathy. So that's just an exercise that we do, but I will tell you that throughout the years, that's been one of the most powerful exercises. We just did that in our group with a man who was very shut down, and I've never seen him show any emotion. And he was crying during that exercise and said, when my mother killed herself or tried to kill herself, I blamed myself for it. I thought it was my fault. And he started to cry. And one of the biggest, toughest guys in groups said, I wish I could just give you a hug. And I said, why don't you? And they stood in the middle of that room hugging each other, which was pretty powerful and powerful for everybody in that room. So we try to do things that are evocative of emotion. I'll tell you another exercise that's really good using film. You can
Alyce, just so you know, we have 5 minutes left.
Okay, I'm going to talk fast. Okay, so you'll have my phone number. I'm really not great on email, but I will, honestly, if you don't get me on my cell phone, try my cell phone. If I'm there, I'll answer. But if I'm not, I will return your call. So, the film Inside Out, it's a Pixar, right? I ask people to watch that film with their kids and their partner and each pick a character and then talk about why you pick that character. Film is a great way to do vicarious experiencing, vicarious emotion through film. So I use film. I did a TED talk. It's up there. It's called Snow White, Gender and Power. It's 16 minutes. It's been a good intro for people to start talking about what they learned in their childhoods. And if you want to watch it, I'd love you to watch it and give me feedback. But it's pretty good, and it's 16 minutes, so you don't waste a whole lot of your time. People will say, have you ever felt unsafe in group? There have been a couple of times where I felt in danger in my own groups. If it happened a lot, I wouldn't do it. The last time was with a young man who I had a connection with, but he was a gang member. When they did amnesty in LA about drive-bys and the gang stopped doing drive-bys, they had people who would just go up and shoot people. And this kid was one of them. And he was in group for domestic violence, but he was very generally violent. And how we began to work with him was that he had a daughter he loved. And I said to him, do you want your daughter to get involved with a man like you? And he said, no. And I said, you are the person she loves. You're the guy she loves. You have to show her how to be treated by men. You have to be that guy. And I said, and you got to start. He didn't have a job. He lived off his wife. He mistreated his wife. I said, how you treat her mother is a big factor. Well, he didn't have any self-respect. He didn't have a job. So he got a job. Everybody in group, and we, by the way, in that group, we had 2 doctors, an attorney. We had a couple of gangbangers. I love the mix in group that socioeconomically, people who would never hang with each other, racially, people who would never hang with each other. So they're in this group together. And so he got a job. And he came to group and he started to fall asleep in group. And the second week he started to fall in group, I kept him after group. And I said, hey, you can't fall asleep in group. I said, I can't give you credit if you're unconscious, And he said, Alyce, I'm tired. I have to get up at 5 a.m. He got really angry and he started screaming at me that he was going to lose his job because of me, because I made him stay awake in group. And I said, hey, you can take a nap. But, he was screaming. He wasn't hearing it. So he left really mad. I tend not to get nervous right away, but I thought about it. And I thought, the people we work with have some perceptual issues. And if you're in a gang and you kill people, you definitely have perceptual issues. So I started wondering, and I was doing group by myself because Mark was on vacation that week. And I come out of my office and there are 3 offices in this little suite. The other therapists are gone. I walk my client out and he's sitting in the room with 15 minutes before group with a bag in his lap. And I thought, oh my God, he's got a gun. And literally my life passed before my eyes. And I knew I wasn't codependent because my partner's life didn't pass before my eyes. It was my own life. And I thought, I've had a really good life. And he opens the bag and he pulls out a sweet roll from Starbucks. And he says, Alyce, will you share my sweet roll with me? And I went, yes. And no, I didn't do that. I just said, yeah, sure. And I thought, the poor guy, if he knew what a drama queen he was working with. But thank you for being here. I'm so happy to be meeting people from all over the country. And please feel free to reach out if you want to. I'm happy to talk to you. And yeah, it's time to leave.
Thank you, Alyce.
You're welcome. Take care, you guys.
Thank you, everybody. There is direction in your chat about what to do now. There will be a timer in the expo room. You can follow those directions to get there. And after the 1-hour lunch break, we've got all the times across the country. Well, 3 of the time zones across the country.
Good to see you, Johnny.
And we'll see you after the lunch break. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.